would be unusual in Yellow Springs to start on time. We'll try it. If anybody's too hot, tell us. We'll open some more windows, and I don't want anybody falling asleep. Welcome to the Yellow Springs Historical Society. My name, for those who don't know me, is Dave Newhart, and I'm president of the Historical Society. It's one of those positions that once you get in, you can't get out. So, it just goes on. And what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about history and maps in Yellow Springs and how you can use maps to learn about the history of Yellow Springs and hopefully a few things that you didn't know before. And it's not, we're not going to take any topic in any great depth, but we're going to try to go through history, seeing how Yellow Springs shows up on maps, how it doesn't show up on maps, and so forth. And hopefully you'll enjoy the trip and be able to find your way through history. And I promised, as we were doing the write-up for this, that we'd make an effort to cover 500 years. And so that's, we start 500 years. Where do you start? You start at the beginning. This is about as close as to the beginning as we can get. This is a world map that was published in 1507, just 15 years after Columbus sailed. I will tell you right now, Yellow Springs doesn't appear on it every place, but it's an amazing map, and I've had a long history or long interest in maps, and this is one of the most fascinating maps you can find out about. It was published in a little town called Saint-Dié in Lorraine in France, about as far from the ocean, as far as the exploration activities you could possibly get in this area, because if you remember, most of that exploration was being done by the Portuguese and the Spanish, and they were not really all that anxious to let information be known about their explorations. And so one of the first mysteries is how did the information about the New World get to Saint-Dié in the mountains of France, and a man named Martin Waldseemüller who was responsible for this map. This is the very first map in history to show North America and South America as separate continents, as not part of Asia, so surrounded by water. So that's
us over there?
This is Africa, Europe, Asia.
And that's what they thought of the entire North and South America.
This is North America. Well, you didn't remember.
Like Long Island.
Yeah, they didn't have a lot to go by yet. Well, another one of the mysteries of this map is the west coast of South America. And although it looks a little distorted here, it's because of the projection it's done on. If you flatten that projection out, you're trying to make around the globe into a flat map, it actually is only about 2%, 2 degrees off from what it really is today that we would map it. And the mystery about that is that this is 1507. Magellan, who is generally credited with finding the way around the bottom of South America, didn't sail into the 1520s. And Balboa, who was the first European to supposedly to have seen the Pacific Ocean from this direction, went across Panama a number of years after 1507. So there's some mystery about how Waldseemüller knew so precisely what the west coast of South America was like. And in fact, there's some speculation that there were some secret Portuguese voyages that we still don't know about today. And the problem was, if you recall your history, the Pope had drawn a line right through here and said everything to the east is the Portuguese, everything to the west is the Spanish, and which is why Brazil speaks Portuguese today and the rest of South America speaks Spanish. But they probably just didn't stop there. They probably, despite what the Pope had said, were sailing around, finding their way around the southern tip of South America. Another thing that's amazing about this map is that there's only one copy known to exist. This map is huge. It's 8 feet by 4 feet, the original, 12 separate sections. printed from wood blocks. But only one copy exists. There was a little booklet that was published with it, and a couple copies of that have survived. And so for years, scholars knew that it must exist, but it wasn't discovered until 1901 in a castle in Germany, Wolfegg Castle in Germany, where it had been bound in a book, the separate sections, for 350 years. It sat on the shelf in the library there for 350 years. But what's probably even more interesting about this map, and the reason why it may have some significance to us even in Yellow Springs, is that it's now owned by the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress purchased it from Prince Waldberg, whose family owned Wolfegg Castle, in 2001 for $10 million. And part of the reason they paid $10 million was because of the rarity. Another reason is because of one word. And if well, there we go. Right there on South America, the word America. It's the first time the word America appeared anywhere. For some reason, Wallace Mueller was giving a lot of credit to Americus Vespucci, who may not have had really, he was more of a talker than a doer, and he'd been on one or two trips, but he apparently got to the right people. The name stuck, and that's where America comes from. And so some people refer to this map as the birth certificate of America. Well, we're gonna go chronologically here for a while, and then eventually we'll pick a few just interesting maps to look at. But right now we'll go chronologically, and we'll skip ahead a little bit. And in fact, we'll skip ahead to the mid-1660s when this map was prepared. It's interesting because you can see now North America is being filled in, and there's some colonizing along the coast. But in the interior, the part that we're interested in, they really haven't got things too well straightened out. Here's Lake Ontario. I guess that represents all the rest of the Great Lakes. And most of the guys that were doing these maps in Europe at the time were taking the accounts that were coming from explorers, second-hand or third-hand accounts sometimes, and trying to piece together what the country must have looked like without ever having been here. Well, they got it wrong here. Because the island of California, and in fact, this came because of somebody who read an account of sailing into San Francisco Bay and just assumed that it connected with the Straits of California down here, and assumed that California was an island. Well, once things got on maps in these days, they tended to stay on maps, and even 100 years after this, into the mid-1700s, some maps were still being produced that showed California as an island. Now we'll move forward a little bit further. This is almost 1700, 1690s, and it still needs a little work on the Great Lakes. No Ohio River, but Lake Erie is starting to show up as well as the rest of the Great Lakes. This map, Americae Septentrionale, I guess is the name. And Septentrionale just means of the north, meaning North America. This was done in Holland, and Holland was a great early center of map making. So again, here we see Great Lakes, Lake Erie, no Ohio River.
And the Canada Sea.
And the Canada Sea, yeah, that's right.
And New Mexico is a chain of islands.
And Florida seems to be. So they were working at it. Okay, now this map starts to get a little bit more interesting. This is 1718, a French map by a man by the name, and I don't speak French, so I'm probably going to butcher this, Guillaume de Lisle.
Guillaume de Lisle.
Okay, Becky, you're going to have to translate for me. And we start finding some interesting things here. The Ohio River is now shown up in the early 1700s. The prospect of it may not be quite right. The mountains, the Appalachian Mountains. And again, this is fairly heavily settled at this point, but there's a chain of mountains that are keeping people out of this area. The French are up here in Canada, and Lake Erie or
Dushat.
Okay.
Of the cat.
Of the cat, that's right. Well,
people for the Erie.
exactly. The Erie tribe, the nation Dushat right there, along the shores of Lake Erie, it was a tribe. They were known as the cat people. I've seen various different sources. One says that when they refer to cat people, they mean raccoons, because the word was actually Erie Lahonan or something like similar to that, or panthers. So either they were panthers or raccoons, I'm not sure. But they had the misfortune of opposing the Iroquois, who you can see the 5 nations later, 6 nations here. And in the late 1600s, there were a series of wars that broke out where the Iroquois were claiming additional territory. And what they were really looking for sources of furs to trade with the English, and the Iroquois, for the most part, were aligned with the English, and the Hurons, and in particular, and Wyandots were aligned with the French. And the Iroquois didn't like some of what the Eries had been doing, and fought a series of wars in the mid 1600s and basically wiped out the Eries. The Eries ceased to exist as a tribe. They spread. Some may have ended up down in Virginia, they think, but pretty much ended their existence as a tribe. And at the same time, although it's not shown on this map, there was another tribe in the area that got pushed out by the Iroquois as the Iroquois was claiming all this territory, and that was the Shawnees. And the Shawnees left the Ohio Valley about the same time as the Eries were destroyed in the mid 1600s, mid to late 1600s, and really sort of dispersed into the south, into the east along Chesapeake, and into Pennsylvania some.
Hey, what is the long narrow thing that's bisecting Newbell come about?
Right there?
Yeah.
It's a range. It's a mountain range that goes up through the center of Michigan. You're not.
All right.
Well, let's move forward in history a little bit, and this map came in an accurate map of the English colony. So now we're going to look at it from the English side rather than the French side. Early 1750s. Really based on earlier knowledge, though, as we'll see in a minute. And I don't think it's going to show up very well here, but we've got the Ohio or Bell River, or the Allegheny River, so you can take your choice. And here is a river that is spelled Chiagnez, which I think probably was pronounced Shawnee or Shawnee, and it's the Muskingum. It's what today would be the Muskingum. And because of the reference to the Shawnees. Well, interesting things started happening about 1700. There was a treaty in Montreal where the Iroquois agreed to start letting tribes back into the Ohio area, and the Shawnees were one tribe that did come back into the area. They had, and I don't think we'll have to see in a later map, but this, you can see right here, the Miamis or Twitwees. Twitwee is the cry of the crane, which was another name for the Miami Indians, were in this area. And they were primarily, big tribe, primarily trading with the French. They thought the French were mistreating them in their trade. They weren't getting fair value for their goods. And so a chief by the name of Memeskia, he had two other names too that the British and the French know named by, moved into western Ohio specifically for the purpose of trading with the English colonists. And he moved in, some of this is a little murky history, but the town they moved into was probably a Shawnee town. He was probably invited by the Shawnees. It was called Pickawillany, which is, you can recognize as a Shawnee word or derivation, in about 1747. And Memeskia built this town up. At one time there were apparently about 1,000 Miamis that were living at Pickawillany. The site of Pickawillany today is just north of Piqua, Ohio, adjacent to the John Johnston farmstead the Ohio Historical Society has, and a canal boat ride and whatever. The site was right near there, and it really it became a destination for English traders. And there were reports that at one time there were 50 English traders living at Pickawillany. Pickawillany didn't last very long, though, as a trading center. Like I say, Memeskia arrived there with the Miamis about 1747. In 1749, a Frenchman by the name of Celeron de Bienville, or something, didn't like the idea that the British were starting to trade into what the English, or what the French thought was their territory. And remember, the Iroquois have claimed ownership of all of this, and the Iroquois and the French didn't get along, so the French really had not been there a lot. So Bienville had an expedition that went down through from the eastern end of Lake Erie, down the Ohio River, up the Great Miami River to Pickawillany, where he showed the flag, and the Memeskia, who the British referred to as Old Britain because he liked the British, the French all of a sudden named Les Demoiselles because he was now a friend of theirs. And they tried to convince him to come back to the French side. The French, as they were going down on this expedition, it sort of reminds me of a dog staking out its territory because they buried lead plaques at the mouths of some of the main rivers entering into the Ohio River, a couple of which have been found, and they tacked up some brass plaques up on the trees, claiming all of Ohio for the French. Well, the French didn't take too well to the fact that the British continued even after Bienville's expedition to trade in Pickawillany, and they sponsored in 1752, so just 5 years basically after Memeskia had moved to Pickawillany, they sponsored an expedition, I guess you'd call it, of 250 Ottawa and Ojibwe Indians who attacked Pickawillany, drove the French out, burnt the trading place, the stockade down, and for good measure, and to take the strength of the Memeskia, they boiled him and ate his heart. So that was the end of Pickawillany. But we'll see again, Pickawillany will show up on maps of this area for another 50 or 60 years, and unless you know the story of Pickawillany, you can't really understand the area. Now this map's a little harder. This is a hand-drawn map. This is Lake Erie. Just try to get our bearings here. The Ohio River. It says Shawneetown right there, and this is the Scioto. There's the Great Miami, Little Miami. This, again, you can't really see it, but it's Mad River, Mad Creek. And Pickawillany should be right around there. So this map is in the Library of Congress, but it's not identified to any person. And a man in western Pennsylvania did a lot of research back in the 1940s, and actually, with pretty good certainty, determined who it was that made the map. A man by the name of John Patton, who was 26 years old. He was a Pennsylvania trader to Pickawillany, and he had made the trip to Pickawillany. And after being at Pickawillany, he was up in this area. There was a place called Miami Fort. He was captured by the French. He was taken to Canada, taken to Detroit, then taken to Montreal, then taken to Paris. So, you know, a trip to Pickawillany, he ends up in Paris before he's done. He was eventually released, went to Britain and then back in the United States, but he didn't live very long. This was 1751 when this happened, or 1750 when he was captured. And we can get little bits and pieces of the area from the traders and those who left reports. But what's amazing here, and again, it's going to not show up very well, is there was a Shawnee town on the upper Scioto, I don't say upper, below where Columbus is now, below Circleville actually, called Maguk, which was another, like I say, another Shawnee town. And there was a trail from Maguk, or upper Shawnee town, to Pickawillany. And it's crossing the headwaters and crossing the Mad Creek. There was another trail from Lower Shawneetown, which was a big trading center about where Portsmouth is now, up to the Mad River and over to Pickawillany. We think this trail right here crossed the Mad River at a place called the Broad Ford. And the Broad Ford is where today's George Rogers Clark Park is. And based on we can't be 100% certain, but we're fairly certain, though, that the trail ran up through Yellow Springs and actually up today's Polecat Road. The Polecat Road was laid down on the, and we'll see a little bit further here a reason why, laid down on the Indian trail that the traders had used in the 1750s. So those would have been the first people to see this area. And in fact, one of the traders, and some of the names you probably recognize, Christopher Gist, George Croghan, Andrew Montour, William Trent, but Christopher Gist left a journal of a trip that he took from Pittsburgh, Fort Pitt, to Pickawillany and back. And on his way back, this is Saturday, March 2nd, 1751, he writes, George Croghan and the rest of our company came over the river, over the Great Miami River. We got our horses and set about 35 miles to Mad Creek. This is where some of the English traders had been taken prisoners by the French. And in fact, two traders had been captured by the French and the Indians at a ford on Mad River in 1750. Sunday, the 3rd, March 3rd. This morning we parted, they for Hockhocking, the Hocking River, I for the Shanoa town, which lower Shawnee town at where Portsmouth is now, and I was quite alone and knew that the French Indians had threatened us. I left the path and went to the southwestward down the Little Miami River or creek, where I had fine traveling through rich land and beautiful meadows, in which I could sometimes see 40 or 50 buffaloes feeding at once. The Little Miami River or creek continued to run in the middle of a fine meadow about a mile wide, clear like an old field and not a bush in it. I could see the buffaloes in it above 2 miles off. I traveled that day about 30 miles, which is making pretty good progress. So basically the thought is he came down that trail probably to about Yellow Springs, where his friends headed off for Maguk and in the east that way, and he traveled on down the Little Miami River. We think that open area where he saw the buffaloes is probably about where Old Town is today. There were no, it's interesting though, there were no Shawnee villages either on the Mad River or on the Little Miami River in the 1750s. Those would come later. Well, all this activity out in this area with the traders brought about one of the greatest maps in early American history, put together by a man named Lewis Evans. And unfortunately, this is a little bit dark. I've got in the back a copy of this map that was very popular, and it was redone and pirated for 50 years afterwards, clear up almost to 1800. It was done in 1755 though, and so this is copy here and the copy in the back are a British knockoff of Evans's map. But Evans just hit it right. He got a lot of information from the traders that had never been shown before on the Ohio country, and it was right as the French and Indian War began gearing up. So there was a lot of interest in the East on what was going on in this country, and he was very chauvinistic. I mean, he made it clear in the little book that goes along with this that this was important territory for the British. The British should stake a claim to it, and promoted the French and Indian War a little bit. But let's see what we can see on a closer view of it. And let's orient ourselves here. This is the Ohio River. This is a piece of it. This is Lower Shawneetown at the mouth of the Scioto, Portsmouth today. And in fact, this was on the opposite side of the Scioto from Portsmouth. And it just shows that even Native Americans didn't always get it right as far as living with the land, because this area still floods terribly today, and it flooded in the late 1750s and wiped out Lower Shawneetown, and they ended up moving further upriver. Here's the Great Miami. Little Miami's right here. And as far as I know, this is the first map that actually shows the names Great Miami River, or Miniami, I guess it actually is on here, and the Little Miniami River. Here's Mad River. And the fact that it's showing up on a map in 1755 is proof that it wasn't named after Mad Anthony Wayne, which some people will tell you. Mad Anthony Wayne was 5 years old when this map was done.
What's all the descriptive bits?
Just information about villages and the Native American villages and things that can be seen. You can see it says limestone right here on the Mad River, which you've got to think are the cliffs along the Mad River that have been pointed out. Here's the trail from McGuck to Pickawilly, which is the English Tuatui town, which the French destroyed, I think it says. So as far as I know, this is the first printed map that shows Mad River, Little Miami, and Great Miami rivers. The next map is another map that was done about the same time when there was all this activity by a man named Thomas Hutchins, who was a surveyor, trained surveyor, and would really be associated with the Ohio country from the 1750s until after 1800 in doing surveying. He did this map in 1763 he had accompanied Bouquet's expedition into the Ohio country during the French and Indian War, and produced this map just after that, 2 years after that expedition. And you can see here's the Scioto River, the new Lower Shawneetown, which is not so lower anymore, it's been moved up river, and the trail to Pickawilly, which looks like it's going straight north here, but Hutchins didn't have it quite right. And if you lay out, he gives you surveying directions on this trail, and if you compare that and the size of the streams which they've marked as they went across them, it pretty clearly was, again, crossing the Little Miami River, probably coming up that same trail that's where Polecat Road is today, crossing the Mad River on the natural ford. It's called the Broad Ford of the Mad River, and then on out through here. So even though Yellow Springs doesn't appear on this map, it should get credit. Well, Hutchins did another map, and this one was in the early days of the Revolution in 1778. It was published in London, but you can see his perspective. He's got the Ohio River much more like we'd expect to see it now. 1778, 25 years after Pickawilly's gone, it's still showing up on the maps, and the trail between the Lower Shawneetown and Pickawilly is showing up on this map. The upper the headwaters of the Little Miami that is crossing here. One of those is probably Yellow Springs Creek. I don't know for certain. And he published with this a book. And here's what he had to say about the Little Miami River and the Great Miami River, which again he was referring to as the Miniami River, but close. Little Miniami River is too small to navigate with bateaus, basically big canoes. It has much fine land and several salt springs. Its high banks and gentle current prevent its much overflowing the surrounding lands in freshets, spring storms. The Great Miniami River, or Rocky River, which was what the French called it, has a very stony channel, a swift stream but no falls. It has several large branches, passable with boats a great way, one extending westwards towards the Wiatna River, another towards a branch of the Minneami River. He also mentions here Mad Creek, where the French formally established themselves, and it's not quite clear what that reference is. Note here one other thing, because it'll come up in a little bit. The southern tip of Lake Michigan, and this is perspective with respect to Lake Erie, at least what Hutchins thought in 1778, because it'll come up again, as I said. Well, this area, about the time that Hutchins was drawing his map, was in a state of transition, because after, yes, sir.
When did the compass become commonly available? Any idea?
I don't know, but it's got to go back into the 1400s probably, 1500s, I think.
Thank you.
After the French and Indian War ended with the British pushing the French out of North America, the British thought that the best way to keep things quiet on the frontier was to prohibit any further settlement, trading, and so forth. Keep the Europeans away from the Native Americans. And so the proclamation of 1763 theoretically kept the colonists to the east of the British colonists to the east of the mountains, and the Native Americans to the west of the mountains. That didn't last very long, and in fact, as there was a history of this, and there continued to be a history of this, but in 1768, the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, in fact, the Iroquois, who were still claiming title to this land, weren't living there, but claimed title to the land, allowed the British colonists to start coming into the area south of, they basically gave up their claim to the area south of the Ohio River. And again, question whether they had the right to do that, but that was all it took for the colonists to start literally flooding in. First at a trickle, and then by the hundreds in the early 1700s, or 1770s, into Kentucky and into western Pennsylvania as well. And that pressure really shifted where the Shawnees were. They had been concentrated on the Muskingum River and the upper Muskingum River, and sort of the western boundaries were the Scioto River, but it pushed them west. And what happened was that affected this area were two new villages that were right here, and Chillicothe and Piqua. Now, there were a number of septs or clans in the Shawnee Nation, and each one had a separate name, and the head village for that sept took the name of the sept. So the Chillicothe's, and there's lots of different ways you see these written or pronounced, but I'm sure this is probably not the way they pronounce it. The Chillicothe was one sept, and Piqua or Picaways were another sept. This Chillicothe village is where we now know as Old Town, and the Piqua village is where George Rogers Park is right now, on the Mad River. So the Mad River and the Little Miami River, and they moved there to get away from the pressure that was coming from settlers in what became West Virginia and Pennsylvania. But what they had was the Little Miami River and the Great Miami River, which made great access routes into their hunting grounds in Kentucky, which were filling up with settlers. Boonesboro was founded in 1775, and just a couple years later, Blackfish, one of the Shawnee chiefs, besieged Boonesboro, and later that year he captured Daniel Boone and brought him to Blackfish's village, which was Chillicothe. It's really confusing because you'll see references in Ohio history to Chillicothe, the Indian town of Chillicothe. Well, there were about 5 different Indian towns named Chillicothe, and there were even several called Old Chillicothe, which is what this one on the Little Miami became known as in later years. It's probably the most famous of the Chillicothe villages because of its prominence during the 1770s, the early days of the Revolution, and the struggle between the Shawnee in Ohio and the settlers in Kentucky.
Have you ever seen any reference to why the Mad River did get its name?
Yeah, I just happen to have something already that probably tells you what that is. We'll get to that. So there's this strife building up back and forth, and it was just, I'll bloody your nose, you'll bloody my nose, and the Shawnee would attack the settlers in Kentucky, and the settlers would send an expedition up the Little Miami or the Great Miami River to attack the Shawnee villages. In 1779, the Kentuckians under a man by the name of Bowman went up the Little Miami to Chillicothe, but they got beat pretty bad and headed back to Kentucky pretty quickly. And it wasn't long after that that the Shawnees and the British together invaded the settlements in Kentucky. There was a man in Kentucky, though, who was gaining prominence because he had taken a group of Kentuckians out to Illinois, to the Illinois towns that were really, had been French towns and became English settlements, Kaskaskia and Cahokia, even though there were a lot of French still there. He captured those towns, and really his action in capturing the Illinois country from the British is what assured eventually, when the Revolution was won, that this whole, what we call the Midwest now, or the Old Northwest Territory, would become part of the United States and not remain as a British colony. Well, he also, then Vincennes, he lost Vincennes and then recaptured it in a really famous march in the middle of the winter through the swamps, and a really miserable expedition. But in 1780, he was back in Kentucky and decided to sort of end the Shawnee problems for good, and he led an expedition up the Little Miami River, through where we are sitting today, and up the, stopping first at Chillicothe to burn Chillicothe, then on up the trail, like I say, through where we're sitting up today to the broad ford on the Mad River, where the other Shawnee village, Piqua, was located, and where he got into a little bit of a battle, where the Kentuckians and the Shawnee fought, not a huge battle because most of the Shawnee warriors weren't there, so it wasn't really all that well protected. But this is a view of what that village might have looked like, although the Indians actually were building cabins as well. George Rogers Clark. And here's the route of his march with 1,000 Kentuckians in 1780 up through where Yellow Springs is, Polecat Road, that old trail, to the Snyderville wasn't there, but to the ford on Mad River, and the Piqua village was just beyond that to the north. I don't know that this is going to show up very well. This is from a topographical map in probably about 1910 or so.
1907.
Is that what it is? And it's patched together, but here's basically the route of the trail. If you go up Polecat becomes Tecumseh Road when you enter Clark County. And it sort of ends in this Snyderville area, which is probably not one of the more prosperous areas of Clark County, but where that ford would have been. And just across the river is George Rogers Clark Park in New Boston, the site of the town of New Boston. This is sometimes referred to the fight between George Rogers Clark and the Shawnee at Piqua as the last battle of the American Revolution. The Kentuckians did have a cannon, and they destroyed the village and 800 acres at least their estimates were 800 acres of corn, which is an amazing amount of corn that had been that the Shawnee had been raising in that bottomland through there. And although it may have been the last battle of the Revolution, it wasn't the last battle in the struggle between the Shawnee and the Americans. This is from the Clark County 1859 wall map, and you can see there's Tecumseh Road or Polecat Road. This had become Tecumseh Mills at that time on the river. And then here's New Boston. This map at least claimed that that was the birthplace of Tecumseh, but Tecumseh was born in about as many places as George Washington slept. This is a 1796 map of the Old Northwest Territory, and I just want to show, you can't see a lot here, but in this area, what is starting to, we're starting to see some real definition to Ohio, some land settlement we'll talk about in a minute. You've got Detroit up here, which became the major center because the British kept holding on to it for a good while, longer than they were supposed to under the Treaty of Paris. In 1786, though, Benjamin Logan, another Kentuckian, again came up the Little Miami River, came right through this area, trying to deal with the Shawnee further up the Mad River and destroyed a couple of more towns. So this was a major thoroughfare, if you will, between the Shawnee villages and the Kentucky settlements. And just to get a context, that was 1786. 1787, Marietta was settled, the first settlement in Ohio down here. 1788, Cincinnati was first settlers in Cincinnati. 1788 was also the year of the Northwest Ordinance, which we'll talk about in a minute. And 1789 was when the Constitution was adopted. So that's what else was going on about the same time. The last of the, well, let me back up a second. As those settlements started coming into this area, the U.S. Army followed pretty quickly. And there was a major fortification established, Fort Washington, at what's today Cincinnati. And it was supposed to be protecting the settlers from the Native Americans. They had a little trouble getting their act together in order to do this, but the first time that the first expedition that was sent out from Fort Washington against the Shawnees, who by this time were, because remember, Chillicothe had been destroyed, Piqua had been destroyed, were farther north on the Great Miami River, occurred in 1790 under the command of this man, Josiah Harmer. And Harmer's campaign would be the last one that I'm aware of, at least, that would use that old trail, the George Rogers Clark Trail, or the earlier trail that the Indian traders had used up through Yellow Springs to the Broad Ford on the Mad River. And he, as I say, he left Cincinnati, went up the Little Miami River, crossed at Mad River, and then headed northwest back to the Great Miami River and further up to his eventual not location, but his goal was the Miami Indian villages at today's Fort Wayne, but he got beat up along the way and turned around and came back. all of this was, we're talking about maps, all of this was commemorated in 1930 in a map that was of the Ohio Revolutionary Memorial Trails that was issued by a commission set up by the state. Now, unfortunately, they were trying to tie it into the highways, and so it's not exactly where the trails were, but one of those trails is right up what is today 68 through Xenia, commemorating all those expeditions that had come from Kentucky and later Cincinnati up through Yellow Springs to Springfield, or to Piqua and then to the other villages. Well, that brings us into the settlement era, and the first settlers into Greene County were 1796, and two men who will be tied very closely to the early history of not only Greene County but Miami Township and Yellow Springs moved into the county, Kentucky 2 years later, a man by the name of Owen Davis and his son-in-law, Benjamin Whiteman. And they settled at the first real settlement in Greene County, which had the great name of Alpha. I mean, if you're going to, the first settlement in the county, why not start at the beginning? And they moved here before the county had really been surveyed at all. This is in fact Owen Davis's cabin at Alpha, which was still standing in the 1840s when this engraving was made, and it was the first courthouse in Greene County. And one of the actions that the county commissioners, and Benjamin Whiteman was one of the first county commissioners, took in 1803, when the county was actually organized, was to authorize a survey of a road from Springfield to Xenia by way of the Yellow Springs. And they also, in that session, granted a license to a man by the name of Thomas Freem to open a tavern in his home at the Yellow Springs. Well, this is a map of Greene County later. We skipped ahead for this map to 1874 from the county atlas. And I want to show something that it illustrates. And yeah, it illustrates the townships. But if you take a look at specifically our township, Miami Township, there's something that this illustrates that you probably hadn't thought of. And what it is, it's a battle. It's the results of a battle, I guess you will. Not a physical battle, but a battle of the Enlightenment versus the Middle Ages. And that's not Antioch versus Cedarville. If you take a look here, look how squared off the sections are here, and look how just sort of distorted they are in southeast of the Little Miami River. Ohio became the testing ground of some Enlightenment theories that really had been pushed by Thomas Jefferson and eventually affirmed by the Congress in the Land Ordinance of 1785 and affirmed again in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which established a public survey system for the entire rest of the country, the part of the country that had not yet been surveyed. And it came because, as part of the whole formation of the Constitution, the states, the eastern states, gave up their land claims west of the mountains. And most of them had land claims, and some of them had overlapping land claims. Some had strange land claims. Connecticut, just think of little Connecticut, just drawing it straight west. Well, it stopped because they acknowledged that New York had the Iroquois country, but then it started up again when you got to Ohio and went across the north part of Ohio. And Virginia and Pennsylvania both claimed intersecting areas in Ohio as well. So they gave up their territory, and the government was looking for a way to raise money without taxing people, and selling this land was their results, or the result of their decision making, and so that's what we're going to see happen in here. And as I say, Ohio was something of a testing ground, and it really was divided up into a lot of different sections. The Seven Ranges over here was where in fact, right here at East Liverpool, there's a monument. It's the point of beginning of all of the U.S. land surveys from 1785 on, with a few gaps. Began there, and the idea of the rectilinear survey. That we're not going to follow landforms. We're going to enforce our scientific, organized view of the world, the squares and so forth on the countryside. We're interested in the Virginia Military District, which when the states gave up their claims, they retained, in the case of Virginia, a section of land to reward their Revolutionary War soldiers if they ran out of land in Kentucky. Connecticut raised the same thing, although they sold theirs and used the money to reward their Revolutionary War soldiers. And then we're going to be interested in the Sims Purchase here. This is a map from about 1910 of the Virginia Military District. Between the Scioto River and the Little Miami River, here's Greene County, and there's the Little Miami River, and this is that deformed part of the county and of our township even. And the reason why is because the Virginians retained the old way of surveying, the way Virginia itself had been surveyed, where you just claimed your land, you put stakes out, you went out and surveyed no matter what shape it was, and which left odd-shaped lands for the next person along. And in fact, that was one of the problems with the system. Here's some examples of some of the worst property boundaries, because people who had, they were entitled to, maybe 50 acres or 100 acres, they wanted the choice land, and they didn't care about the other stuff, and this is what was left.
Gerrymandering.
Right.
Yeah. Well, the other side, the more enlightened side of the Little Miami, had some problems too, and they were mostly around this man, John Cleve Sims, who was a New Jersey citizen who decided that he was going to make his fortune in land speculation, which was the national hobby at the time. And he went to Congress and lobbied for 2 million acres in southwest Ohio that he was going to buy. This was in 1787. He didn't really have enough money to pay for 2 million acres, but his idea was, once I've got it, I'll sell it, make my fortune, and so forth. Well, the problem was that he didn't keep very good records, and he didn't really sell the land fast enough, and he sometimes sold the same land twice. And in fact, when all the dust settled, he actually did purchase in 1794 311,000 acres between the Little Miami and the Great Miami Rivers. But he had sold land in that 2 million acres he thought he had earlier, and so there were a lot of people had built houses and farms and so forth on property that in fact they didn't own because they bought it from him and he didn't have title to it. And then to add on top of all this stuff, his house, his large log house in North Bend, burnt in 1810 with all of his records in it. So it was into the 1840s or the 1850s until some of this got sorted out. But we were in what was originally his purchase. Again, between the Little Miami and the Great Miami River, and where are we? Springfield, right in here. This incidentally shows the dates that they were surveyed. But his ultimate purchase was all from Warren County, southern Warren County and below. Is all he ended up getting. One of the things he was required to do in his purchase was to set aside land for churches, for schools, and one whole township was supposed to be set aside for a public university. Well, he didn't get around to that either, and the government took pity on the state and ultimately gave the state a township for that university. But by that time, things had been settled in pretty much in all the good territory, And so they had to send a surveying expedition out into what then and still is sort of the middle of no place, where they laid out Miami University. Miami University was to be the University of the Miami Purchase, which was what Sims called his property. This is the way it's divided up. Somebody asked me earlier about the squares on the map. This reflects that the new way of thinking about surveying and land ownership. It's all laid out into squares, and each one of these Roman numerals is a range, which is an east-west line, and then each one of the numbered, Arabic numbered sections, or it's not sections, it's confusing to say that, townships within that. So you can, if you have a range number and a township number, you can get right down into where you are, and you can see how they're numbered. Sims did it different than the rest of the country, but that's not surprising. And within a section of 600, a township was 6 miles by 6 miles, a surveying township. Then a section was a mile by a mile square, and then divided in here. So again, you could, if you had this piece, this 40 acres, you're the southeast 1/4 of the southeast 1/4. This is southeast 1/4, and this is the southeast 1/4 of Township 3 of Range 8. And you could find exactly where you were, as long as you knew what survey it was. And that's why you'll see, if you look at a lot of your deeds today even, they'll refer to the MRS survey or the land between the Miami surveys. But MRS means Miami River Survey. And this is what it was done with. A man by the name of Israel Ludlow was hired to survey land first for Sims and then for the government. And in fact, he surveyed Miami Township, Greene County, in 1802, 1803. And this is his compass, which is at the Heritage Center in Springfield. And it's pretty neat if you like those things. Well, this map is from about 1819. It's a copy of the survey from the Surveyor General's office in Chillicothe. It's a little dark, but if you take a look here, it's a plat of the United States lands in the County of Greene. Here's the Miami River, so we don't care about the Virginia Military District. Here's the range numbers, range 5, 6, 7. 8's the range we care about. There's the Mad River. And if we go over 3, 4, we're interested in Township 4. And Township 4 is the surveying township that Miami Township is in. Now, somebody's slightly drawn the line someplace right about there, which is the current county line, because originally this surveying township actually stretches across what would become the Greene County line. And this is the survey from about the same time. You can see it's certified by Edward Tiffin, who happened to be the first governor of Ohio, but the Surveyor General, about 1819. And that's the surveying township. There's the corner of the Little Miami River, and each of the section numbers, remember they were numbered up like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, and in this section, you can see that mostly this doesn't show physical attributes, but there's Yellow Spring is mentioned, and there's been some subdivision right there. Up here is where our farm is. And this is what it looked like when it all came together. This is a map from about 1812. You can see those squares, most of the states. This area was up above the Greenville Treaty Line, and at the time this map was done in 1812, it wasn't open for settlement and hadn't been surveyed. Here's Southwest Ohio, and then we've got this gap where the Virginia Military District is, and this experimentation in Ohio eventually spread across the entire country. Well, let's get back to where we are, which is Ludlow. And one of the confusing things is, where was Ludlow? we know that Ludlow existed early on. Lewis Davis, who bought the section that the Yellow Springs was in from the government, a son of that Owen Davis, who had settled at Alpha with Benjamin Whiteman, and then around 1802, moved up the Little Miami River to Clifton because Owen Davis was a miller and he thought that was a good site for mill, along with Benjamin Whiteman. His son-in-law moved with him. His son, Lewis Davis, bought the section from the government that the Yellow Springs is on. Well, the problem with finding out much about that, I guess I had this romantic picture of Owen Davis and Lewis Davis in his cabin, his lonely cabin at the Yellow Springs after he bought this property. And that turns out probably not to be true. In fact, he had at least 100 land entries in the Cincinnati Land Office about this time. He was buying land like crazy for speculation, and he ended up going broke in the Panic of 1819 and losing his land and supposedly is buried in a pauper's grave in Logan County someplace. But he did try to develop the land at the Yellow Springs into a town. Ludlow was the town. This appeared in 1810 in Cincinnati newspaper, 1812, excuse me, Cincinnati newspaper. This beautiful town that he's laying out. Well, as far as we can tell, if it was platted with Greene County, the plat hasn't survived. And we're not sure where it was. We know it was someplace around the Yellow Springs. It had a post office. It had one of the first two post offices in Greene County in 1805. In fact, in 1803, Ohio only had about a dozen post offices, so very, very early to have had a post office under the name Ludlow. Probably at the Springs. In 1810, a few years before this was done, Ludlow was listed on the postal route from Cincinnati up the Great Miami River to Dayton and Troy, and then back down through Springfield and the Little Miami River back to Cincinnati. Well, I thought we ought to be able to find Yellow Springs, the earliest location of Yellow Springs on the map, and then I get trapped into Ludlow, and it turns out that Ludlow is what I should have been looking for the earliest spot on the map. This is an 1818 map. Oops. And if we take a look at Greene County, there's Ludlow. There's a sort of an oddly spelled Xenia, but probably result in a lot fewer misspellings. This is an 1815 map of the Miami country, so I'm going back earlier. We're still looking for the earliest map. And let's see if I can make this again up there. This map actually, someplace, if I find it, of Greene County, Mad River, right there, actually says Yellow Springs. So, well, tell me about that. Why isn't Ludlow on there?
Where were these maps?
Some of them were published in atlases and some of them were published in books, and this was an era when there were a lot of state or atlases with state maps in them. So you'd buy an atlas of the United States and it would have a map of each state. And that's where most of these came from. Well, this came from in a narrative book. Well, here, this one is 1812, and Ludlow is right there. So I'm getting pretty early. This map, which I've got a lousy copy of because I copied it out of a book, and there's only a couple of copies known, and the Ohio Historical Studies got it. And it's an 1807 map, survey map, and it has, you can't really see it in this direction, it has both Yellow Springs and Ludlow. And as far as I know, this is the first time that Ludlow appeared on a map in 1807. So it was here pretty early, but not as. This is the tract, one of the tracts that Lewis Davis bought. This is the Yellow Springs tract put on a modern map. And if you see, this is a plat map. You can go to the there's a company in Dayton that publishes them, and you can go to various places. The County Soil Conservation Service has them, office that usually has them. And there's section 21, section 15, this is section 14, so we're, it's going up this way. And so we can still find, based on those original survey numbers, exactly where the property was. The Yellow Springs tract was transferred about 1818, I think, to from Lewis Whiteman to Benjamin Whiteman, or let's say Lewis Whiteman, Lewis Davis to Benjamin Whiteman, his brother-in-law, and a man by the name of Martin Baum from Cincinnati. Martin Baum built the house that's now the Taft Museum in Cincinnati. He was a real estate speculator too, and he lost it all in the panic of 1819, so only lived in the house for about a year. But they had bought a lot of land in Miami Township together. They tried to sell it on land contract in 1825 to Lewin Watson and another man as trustees for what we call the Owenites, the group from Cincinnati that were going to have a communal living. They didn't follow through, and in 1827 they canceled the land contract and resold the property to a man by the name of Elisha Mills, William Mills' father, who was going to operate the resort. And interestingly, in the deed, and this is the land contract deed, it said, it expressly understood first that the aforesaid not bound by this instrument to convey 4 lots of ground being part of the aforesaid land and situate in the town of Ludlow, containing in all about 1 acre, which were lots sold by us to Mrs. Davis, Judge Turner, and a Mr. Grant, unless we can purchase them on reasonable terms. In addition to the above mentioned sum, the purchase price, the amount of the 2 certain frame buildings shall be valued at, situate on the foregoing premises and in the town of Ludlow, and known as at the Yellow Springs as Rodecker's and Grant's houses. So there was something that was Ludlow. What it was and where it was isn't exactly clear, but they had sold all of 3 or 4 lots in it and had to accept it out of the transfer. In this, this is a 1819 gazetteer, which was just basically a dictionary of geographical locations in Ohio, and no mention in this of Ludlow, but Yellow Springs, situated in Greene County, 9 miles north of Xenia, near the source of the Little Miami River, are a curiosity and are said to possess considerably strong medicinal qualities. Here is also kept a post office. So whoever wrote the gazetteer was not very impressed by the town it located. And moving into the 1820s, we cease seeing Ludlow very much on the maps and start seeing Yellow Springs regularly. In fact, the post office name shifted back and forth a couple of times from Ludlow to Yellow Springs, but it permanently became Yellow Springs in 1823, and coincidentally that was, or did I say 1827, and that was the year when Elisha Mills bought the Yellow Springs tract and became postmaster. So he probably liked the idea of promoting the Yellow Springs as a resort and wanted the town's name to be that as well, although there wasn't much of the post office's name. So we have Yellow Springs here. We also take a look at this north boundary, mouth of Maumee River. There was a big mistake made in the surveying, and for years, Lake Michigan was thought to come down, the tip to be further north than it actually was. And so when Ohio was admitted as a state, the Constitution said the northern boundary was a line drawn from the tip of Lake Michigan to the northern capes of Maumee Bay. But the Northwest Territory said the states were to be divided into 2 sets, a north set and a south set, and the line was to be a line drawn straight east and west from the tip of Lake Michigan. And by the 1820s, they realized that went below the mouth of Maumee Bay. And why did anybody care? Well, Ohio was building a canal from Cincinnati to Lake Erie, and Indiana was building a canal from Terre Haute up to Lake Erie, and they both came down the Miami River, and they were both expecting a big port to be developed at the mouth of the Miami River on Lake Erie, where Toledo was. So this was the famous Toledo Strip, which in the 1830s, as Michigan was trying to become admitted as a state, they claimed that property. Ohio called out its militia, and Michigan called out its militia. There were the only injury that we know of that actually occurred was when an Ohioan got into a fight in a bar and stabbed a Michigan deputy sheriff. But,
That was the Ohio Michigan.
and ultimately, because Ohio had more political pull, because it was a state, Ohio was awarded the Toledo Strip, and Michigan, as a consolation prize, got the Upper Peninsula, which is why the Upper Peninsula is part of the state of Michigan. And here you can see a map that was done in the late 1830s, and there's it says old boundary line, new boundary line. I just want to mention this as another kind of mapping and surveying. As the area got settled, there was more time to spend on interesting things, if you will, and surveyors to do it. And this particular plate came from the first publication that the Smithsonian Institution ever published in the 1840s, Squire Davis's Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, and although it says Mississippi Valley, it's really mostly about Ohio. There were some others as well. They surveyed or had local people survey a lot of the mound builders' mounds that were still in existence at that time. A lot of them don't exist. And this particular one, and I don't know, maybe somebody can tell me whether any remnants of it still exist, on the Little Miami River. And the polygon here represented is situated on the right bank of the Little Miami River, 7 miles above Xenia, Greene County, Ohio. It lays chiefly in Section 24, Township 4, Range 8, so we can use our system. And in fact, if you put it on a modern map, this is the line between part of the South Glen and I can't think of the name of the people who have the farm. I've got a metal blocking this.
Yes.
But this is the line of the Glen. So I don't know, Bob, is there any Thunderburst? Exactly, Thunderburst farm. Are you aware of any remnants of that?
It probably would have been plowed over so many times.
Yeah, but I think that's what happened. That's what happened to a lot of them.
Bob Reardon at Wright State has excavated some of it to put it back, so it's basically all under the surface.
Oh, okay. But it has been
But
actually.
you can find evidence of it archaeology. The old Bell earthworks.
But then this man came into the picture, Armsby Mitchell. This is in a Civil War uniform, but he was a surveyor. He put together a survey of the Little Miami Railroad in 1837 from Cincinnati to Springfield, but he was primarily interested in the which route was going to be taken from Xenia to Springfield. And here's what he said. Between Cincinnati and Springfield, the charter makes the one point, Xenia in Greene County, and having ascertained by an examination on horseback that the country indicates more than one route by which Springfield and Xenia might be united, it was thought expedient to commence the examination with the instruments at Xenia. The intermediate country between Xenia and Springfield is intersected by the Little Miami River, which forms an indentation in the country 100 feet lower than the least elevated of the two termini of the section. Two main routes were presented for examination. The one basically through Clifton, the other through Yellow Springs, which he describes as from Xenia to Old Town on the Miami, thence up the river to a convenient point of crossing, and from the crossing to gain the requisite elevation by an ascending grade carried along the sloping banks of the Miami and the Yellow Springs branch to Baum's Prairie, which was Baum, again, Martin Baum, that I mentioned before. Baum owned all the property that became Whitehall Farm. And he describes this: on the first quarter of the 9th mile, our line leaves the river and falls on the descending country, which falls into the Yellow Springs branch. The ground for the next mile and a half is favorable for the location of our grade. On the 10th mile, we pass the Yellow Springs, and on the 11th mile, our line enters Blondes Prairie. From this point to Springfield, a minute description of each mile is unnecessary. The route is uniformly favorable for 8 miles, passing principally over open prairies. No more grading will be necessary for more than half the distance, and one will be furnished by the ditching requisite to drain water from the prairie. And this is what the result was. This is from the history of the Little Miami Railroad. And the railroad up from Cincinnati through Xenia. Yellow Springs doesn't make this map, but and into Springfield. Originally, that was the main line of the Little Miami, connecting with the Lake Erie and Mad River, which was coming down from Sandusky to make the first river to lake rail connection. Within a few years, though, the Columbus and Xenia was built from Xenia to Columbus, surprising. Yeah, and that became the main line of the Little Miami, and this became the Springfield branch. But it lasted. In 1853, William Mills, the son of Elisha, decided to lay out a town. He had gotten the railroad through town in 1846. This is the plat that he filed in 1853 in Greene County records. And it's interesting because he also applied for incorporation of his town, and the Neffs, who owned the Glen at that time, the old resort, opposed it, and it wouldn't be until 1856 that it was brought into, it was incorporated. But you can definitely see the basis of the layout here for what we have today. That, I apologize for showing up so poorly. It's, in 1855, just after that map was done, a publisher by the name of Anthony Biles from Philadelphia published 2 maps that are of a lot of interest to Yellow Springs. The first is the Greene County map. And the second, well, here it is. The second one in a minute, I guess. This is the Miami Township, a little bit clearer because it's from a printed reproduction. And this is the first cadastral map that I'm aware of the area, which shows land ownership.
Was that cadastral? That's what it
Cadastral,
means?
yeah.
It shows
Land ownership, yeah.
Cadastral.
And Yellow Springs, what do we find interesting? The Yellow Springs Fairfield Pike and the Yellow Springs, the Byron, Yellow Springs, and Clifton Pike. You connect those major. And William Mills was behind those. In 1861, the General Assembly authorized the voters of Miami Township to take over the to basically tax themselves to take over the 2 turnpikes. And so they, at the time of the Civil War, they ceased being turnpikes. But you can see here, there's a toll gate on this one. Which shows. We'll see W.R. King here in a minute. Aaron Harlan, the man who built our house, Whitehall. And you can see the mills, Spring Grove Mills, in the Little Miami Valley. Water Cure shows up. So, interesting map, lots of information. Julius Cone, who was a surveyor who lived in Yellow Springs, put together a map of the village, which was also published by Biles. And this is it. And what I did here, thanks to Scott, who Annie Okeana has the only original copy of this map I'm aware of, and he photographed it, and I've got some sections that are worth taking a look at. There's the title and Mills's house next to it. Oops.
That was the house on Mills Lawn.
That was the house on Mills Lawn. And in fact, here is Mills Lawn.
Yeah.
Right there's the house, Honorable William Mills. Here's his gardens. Here's the gardener's cottage. Now you think, well, that's in the center of property, how could that be? Because that's a little yellow house that got incorporated into the Lapidus's modern house. And in fact, this was Pennell Street, and this was Limestone Street. They didn't go through. In fact, they didn't go through until the 20s. And so today, this cuts right across there. Here's Judge Mills's schoolhouse. That's Little Antioch.
Yeah.
And Dr. Groves' house, Grimes' house, excuse me, which is the house that's going to be taken down here shortly for the apartments, and his doctor's office right there. What else do you see that's interesting in this one?
I think it's Short and Xenia is the so-called Antioch.
Oh, Antioch Bookstore, right there. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. And that's Professor Pennell.
Yeah, that's
Under
under the calendar.
Chris, in your house. Here's another section. This is the west part of town. And here's a park that doesn't exist at all, Judge Mills Park. There were actually, 3 parks laid out at this time, plus Mills Lawn, which was in essence a park. Another park up here, and then Oak Park. This I think, Glen Park? I can't remember what the name of it is. Interesting thing on this map, right here, Dublin. So apparently it was the Irish community or enclave, here on sort of out on Dayton Street. And then this mountain that appears down at the end of Herman and Marshall Street. I don't know what that was. You think that's the hill, the Gun Park Hill? Well, there's South College Street. Yeah, exactly. That's right. That's
Yeah.
exactly where it is. Yeah. Now, I've always been fascinated. This is William R. King's property. There's Fairfield Pike, and he had apparently a really nice setup. Scott tells me I knew he was on the first board of Antioch, but he was also related to the kings of the powder mill down in the Gutters. Well, things do change, and we've seen a couple of those things. But this is actually another form of mapping here that comes from Microsoft, but Google Maps and all these things you can see now with the computer. And here's Xenia Avenue. And what I want to focus on here is Cemetery Street, and see how it goes. And Dwine's Pond, and there's Polecat Road and Ellis Park, because we were talking about Polecat Road earlier. Well, this is a surveyor's report from 1844, where Aaron Harlan, who owned Whitehall at the time, was asking the county to vacate the Broadford Road, which is the Cemetery Street and Polecat Road, and to draw a straight line from the Springfield Road to the county line. Well, that apparently was never done. At least I can't find any remnants of it. But it's mentioned, let's see, beginning at or near Mills Sawmill in the road leading from Xenia to Springfield, White Oak, through the lands of Mills and into the lands of Aaron Harlan is where they're describing this new road to go. What's interesting is in this plat map, Clifton Road or Cemetery Street is shown going across 68 Springfield Road, across the creek, and running into a road that goes north and south there that I guess could be Walnut Street, but it didn't connect to Polecat at the time. Here is 2 years later in the Biles map, the street connects to Fairfield, but Cliff Street is shown going across the creek, which it doesn't. Cox had a blacksmith shop, and in fact that reference to Cox this is a section of the county map, so done in 1855, it's got it even completely different. It's got it just ending at the creek and not going north at all. And this is from the 1874 atlas, and it finally is like we see it now, running into Fairfield Pike. There's Polecat. There's the lane through Whitehall Farm Cemetery. So you've got to be careful when you're using maps to understand what happened, and sometimes they're based on things that never happened but were written down someplace. This is that 1874 county map I mentioned before. There was a whole craze of atlases done in the 1860s and 1870s, and lots of times they featured views. This is a view of John Wright's farm, and Doug Bailey did a study of the Clark County Atlas in these views and comparing them to existing farms, and it's amazing how many of the particular buildings can still be picked out in some of the farms that exist.
Where was the right?
It was, which should show up on this map, it's over in the eastern part, right here.
It's still there.
Excuse me?
It's still there.
Yeah, and the Wright family is still
Right.
around. So this is the township map from the same same atlas. I don't know what else we can show here. This is big section here is John Allen's is Whitehall Farm. Joseph Saberton down here. That's what became John Bryan Park. Both of those properties had been owned by Bond, Martin Bond, early on. Grinnell Mills, Yellow Springs, 1874. Not a lot different than what it was in 1853. Not a lot different than what it is now, except this big Oakwood Park there. That's where the apartment buildings are. This is Union Street.
Used to be the sheep meadow.
This is 1896, and this section of town, the old section of town, really hasn't changed very much from 1874 or 1873, but we now have another section of western part of town. And I believe this right in here is Dublin that we saw in the early map. This or this, I can't remember which one it is. But we have the western suburbs added to it. Another kind of map to take a look at, we'll wind up here pretty quick, is that shows a lot of information were the Sanborn fire insurance maps. And Sanborn mapped towns periodically, every 10 years, every 5 years, and put information about structures. So if you were an insurance company looking to underwrite in a particular town, you could buy one of their atlases and see what risks you were taking, because although you can't really pick it out here, you can see it'll mark whether it's frame or brick, and if it's an industrial building, it'll tell what kind of fire protection it's got and what kind of boilers it has and all sorts of things. And so you can really pick out a lot of information. So this is Yellow Springs in 1895, Xenia Avenue. There's the Presbyterian Church.
And Short Street is named Elm Street. On
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's
Continuation of Elm.
yeah. And Corey's Grove, you know, the railroad station. Well, we've seen the Indian trails. We've seen the development away from those trails and the road network. Railroads were the big things as far as transportation is concerned. And Ohio, starting in the 1880s, 1890s, into almost 1920, published almost every year a railroad map of the state because it was so important for getting around. And here's our section of that. And we can find something else interesting here. Yellow Springs. How many people know where Hennessy is? Hennessy was the Houston station. And Hennessy actually shows up on the maps before Houston. Houston was on the road, Hennessy was on the railroad. Memory Chapel is still the area referred to where Old 68 branches off into Springfield.
Right.
Well, railroads were passing out by 1902, and another form of transportation was becoming very popular. This actually is 1896. This is probably the first set of county road maps that was published for Ohio, but it wasn't for driving, it was for bicycling. And the Ohio Division of the League of American Wheelmen published this in 1896. You can see the railroads are on there, but less important than the street roads. And then in 1910, Ohio finally publishes the very first set of road maps of the state. They were published not as all as one, but again, as separate county maps. And unfortunately, the color didn't come through on this, but you can see blue lines are gravel roads, orange lines are macadam roads. And if you look at what's now 68 up through here, in the original, you can tell that it's a blue line. It was only a gravel road at the time this was published in 1910. Taking that to the extreme, I like this map. It doesn't really prove much of anything. This is a 1948 traffic survey map, and it's the wider the line, the more traffic. So this is right before the interstates were developed, and so you can see where those interstates are going to end up even before they were developed, because 675 to Dayton to Springfield and 70 across here, and it's interesting because it gives you an idea of how heavily traveled some of those roads were. Another form of map that is just shown for interest. This is Union Village down in Warren County, and it's sometimes called a bird's eye view, showing the buildings themselves. And I wanted to show that because that's an early, I think 1830s or 1840s view of Union Village. But here's one that's much more modern, and that's our own village map that Joe Williams did. And this is going to be a great historic artifact someday because it's got the drawings of the actual buildings. I mean, and the businesses that are in them. I think this is a tremendous map. But we're still doing these sorts of things. This is something the Community Information Project just put out, and it shows, not with the same kind of detail, but the buildings in Yellow Springs with the keys to what's where, and you get a feel for the actual size of the buildings. I put this one in just because I liked it. It was information that I hadn't seen anyplace else. It's a 1985 map of the Greene County school districts shown on a county map. And so here's the Yellow Springs exempted village school district. You can see size, just territory-wise, how small it is compared to Cedarville, for example, or Xenia, which is huge. Xenia Township is the largest township area-wise in the state. It's that Virginia Military District lack of planning. We're back to the future or whatever. Here's a bicycle map of Greene County from a few years ago, producing maps just like the League of American Wheelmen did in 1896. One of my favorite recent maps that I think Hidden, Ohio. It was just published a couple of years ago by a professor at University of Northern Kentucky. It's got a tremendous amount of information in it, but it's paranormal information. And so when you look at it, if you look at that typeface indicates a haunted area. So
That's a Bigfoot?
yeah, that's a sighting of what's Mothman or Bigfoot or one of those things. And this one Scott just mentioned. Does anybody have any idea what the legend of the phantom kangaroo is?
You gotta go on that somebody in South Vienna.
He's got his own little symbol too.
That sounds even better than the ghostly beagles and.
The hounds. And I'd like to just finish up almost with another modern view of the satellite, what you can find today, and now go right into see the close up to the buildings, and these, if you click on them, will give you street views. But the old ways haven't been totally forgotten. This is a map in an atlas that was just published. I think I brought a copy of it along. It's the greatest bargain you'll get for 1995, and you can see how some of the old style coloring is being used in it, and it's really clean typographically, and you can find some. This was published in Northern Kentucky as well, so it's a relatively local publication. But instead of our square township and range numbers and so forth, now we've got zip codes. So that's it. Thanks.
You did say why Mad River was better.
Oh, I did. Let me see if I can find it. It was because of how wild it was, and it was a gravel bottom, and it moves really fast. And I think,
It goes completely insane during.
and I'm not sure if it's this account. I didn't. There's one account where I've read it talks about the Mad River having. Just a second. This is actually one of the first recorded descriptions of the Yellow Springs in 1805. But then he talks about going to Dayton, and considering the flatness of the country, I was greatly astonished at observing the impetuosity of Mad River. It is one continued foaming rapid, and this is in August, and although waters were then generally low, I found it ran nearly across the Miami River at its mouth in a limpid torrent, discharging more water than the Great Miami which received it, although not more than 1/3 its breadth. So I think that's probably what was observed by the early guys.
But you did say why it was Greene County. I've never heard anybody say that. Or was there a Colonel Greene or
There
something?
was a General Greene and
General Greene.
Nathaniel Greene and Rubber Snow.
Quaker general.
This was read out.
Okay.
Yes.
Was that General Greene with the E? Because I know from 1820 and 1850, the E was added after
I have read, I think it always has an E on it, but I've read some people say that in the late 1700s in particular, probably before that a man's intelligence and education was shown by the number of different ways he could spell the same word. So,
That was Andrew Jackson.
You'd be a genius.
Did you see any reference to the
it's hard to figure. That's one of the things I'm interested in, trying to figure out. And if you go back, if I went back far enough in here, it shows up a little bit on the 1855 maps, but not as a continuous line. So I think some of the roads, just like in the real early maps that show roads, the only road that's shown from Dayton to Springfield is through Yellow Springs. And by the 1840s, they were building turnpikes down the Mad River Valley, and that wasn't the main road anymore. So I think some of that changed a little bit.
About 2 years ago, there was some form of kangaroo that was loose out near.
I remember that. That's right.
That bike park out of the fairgrounds out there.
You saw this while you were in the car.
No, it was loose for about 2 weeks, and people kept citing it. It was somebody's.
That must have been the source. Any other? Yeah. Oh, refreshments in the back. And if you're not a member of the Yellow Springs Historical Society, I encourage you to join.